And a lot of people are just really frantic, desperate to avoid the silence for fear of what they might finally hear when they sit still, shut up, and patiently wait to hear what you can only hear in silence. So does that mean, airstrikes on the data center? It's like, no, that's, no, that's not what it means. It's like men will literally call in the airstrikes on the data centers instead of going to church. Like, bro, like, it doesn't have to be this way.
James, welcome to the podcast. Good to have you.
Hey, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome back to Dallas. A little rainy today.
There's a storm.
There is a storm in Dallas. James Poulos.
What does it mean?
Over the country.
Over the country, yeah, exactly. So, to start out, so you've thought a lot about spiritual warfare, technology, the intersection of those. And that was even before a lot of the AI stuff started coming down the pike. At this point, how are you thinking about AI, the impact? What are the opportunities and threats you see there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd stick with what I've said for a few years, trying to just help people wrap their minds around what it is that we're dealing with. Artificial intelligence, not a great moniker. I don't think it's got that much explanatory value, not as much as is attributed to it. What we're dealing with is automated simulators. These are things that you can kind of give them a push, and they generate simulations. And they'll simulate pretty much whatever it is that they're told to simulate. That means that for the first time, we are confronted with the ability to simulate things that until very recently were considered to be the province of human beings or of spiritual beings. We're getting close to a point where even the human soul can be simulated somewhat, that you can provide people with the kind of sensory and emotional experience that leads them to feel as if they were engaging with an entity that did have a soul, or that did have consciousness, or in some sense was a person that had personhood. If you believe that that intelligence is the most powerful and significant of our faculties, and that consciousness is really a kind of epiphenomenon of intelligence, then I think that you will be led toward a kind of stupidity, an inability to understand that that automated simulation is what's going on here, and what's not going on is our faculties are being taken to a sort of superhuman level, to a level that is, that renders us obsolete in some way. Simulation can be dissimulation. Simulation can be deception. Simulation can lead to delusion. And it's just an unfortunate reminder that I think many of us are encountering right now. That when it comes to these things, the smartest among us can be some of the most foolish or the most easily misled. And that seems to me to be kind of the ground floor of where we need to be focusing our own sort of thoughts and our own spiritual energy when it comes to, not building for ourselves just a huge stumbling block that leaves us flat on our face.
So there's definitely a sense where the true believers of AI are sort of transhumanist in thinking that we'll be enabled by this AI to achieve another level of evolution and fly off into the stars. You're saying that's not in the cards, or that's not an ideal outcome.
Well, there's a lot of angel envy. Biblically, the demons are envious toward human beings. We have bodies, and that bothers them, and they wish that they could sort of live, the ultimate like depraved human existence. But no, they can't even enjoy that satisfaction. But today, and not for the first time in human history, many people look at the angelic lifestyle and they go, I want that. I don't want to be trapped in this meat sack. I don't want to, like look in the mirror and see this like unattractive nerd thing staring back at me. And especially at a time when those who are putting the most emphasis on the beauty of the human form are kind of going, far it's toward the other excess, which is, just, meat maxing and really deriving any kind of understanding of spirituality from the kind of worship of the body. So on the one hand, we've got worship of the bodiless existence. And on the other hand, we've got worship of, really the existence of the mere body. And those things, that's not an accurate reflection of our given selves, of our created human being. And, this is, of course, just the, a throat clearing for a long conversation about theology and anthropology and all the rest. But whatever it is, it is, it's either post-Christian or it's sort of heretically Christian, if you want to go back to the Gnostics and the Cathars and the Bogomils and all those people. But, we've seen this movie before. We know how it ends, and it don't end too well.
Right. So the AI stuff is part of a larger contemporary discussion about innovation. You have the Yak movement, you have like the techno-optimists out there, sort of different flavors or, variations of some core principles, I would say. What do you think of those? And do you think that unfettered innovation, like just pure innovation, pure building technology is what saves the world? It's what saves America?
Well, how would you know if your building had been purified? What would it mean for it to be pure, right? Spiritually pure? Well, then you're already like measuring it by a different standard. So I think, trying to innovate your way out of the dependence of innovation on an external standard of purity or goodness, it's not going to happen. It can, you can innovate your way out of your life and then you're dead. So how about that, it's a little frustrating to watch many, well-meaning and intelligent Americans who look at identity politics. Bad, those are the bad guys. Like the opposite of that is turning our identity into the innovator's identity and creating a politics around that identity. And it's like, that's not actually, that's these things might be rivals, but they're not opposites. This too is identity politics. Like, what if I told you it was enough to just do things and then your identity could be, something larger, rooted in something more spiritually nourishing than just frantically like making things.
Yeah.
This is, you can go to Alexis de Tocqueville on this stuff, where he shows up and goes, wow, like all these people are very frantic and they keep swinging back and forth between, brooding inwardly and then rushing out into the world and just making stuff and building stuff and moving and like forever trying to catch up with what they feel like is the opportunity that's out there, with the kind of material flourishing that either always seems to be just out of reach or at last, I'm living the dream and then, but wait, but I need more, but I'm falling behind. But I mean, we know how this goes. It is, in a certain respect, the American experience, and in a certain respect, it's the human experience. We are mortal, and there is only so much we can do and only so much that we can be. And trying to distract ourselves from the reality of that and the magnitude of the situation that we find ourselves in. We see where it leads. It leads to a culture of not just high innovation, but high distraction, and a lot of noise to signal. And right now, when there's so high of a noise to signal ratio, it's not just because, we just need more smart people putting out stronger signals. It's like, well, at a certain point, like, the bandwidth fills up and you just get this wall of sound, and a lot of people are just really frantic, desperate to avoid the silence for fear of what they might finally hear when they sit still, shut up, and patiently wait to hear what you can only hear in silence. So does that mean, airstrikes on the data centers? Like, no, that's, no, that's not what it means. It's like men will literally call in the airstrikes on the data centers instead of going to church. Like, bro, like, it doesn't have to be this way. But when we are thinking through, when we're thinking through all of these challenges in such a stubbornly, stiff-neckedly, anti-Christian or post-Christian or whatever it is that people think it can be, rejecting the counsels of thousands of years of saints and monks and the church, and it's not surprising that conversation is in some sense punked. Like, it just isn't gonna work. And so I think on the one hand, people are coming gradually to the realization that when you try to understand our relationship to technology in a spiritual vacuum, you just end up either going in the direction of worshiping the technology itself, or you try to go in the Nietzschean direction, which is, well, no, like, we'll just, like, the tech will get better and we'll get better and it'll just be a race against ourselves until one day we can't even understand what we are anymore because we're not us anymore. We've seen that movie too, the Russians, the Soviets tried it, and how'd it go? 50 years of the Russians online are now joking that all the kind of moldering Soviet aerospace stuff is like the ruins of an ancient advanced civilization. Well, yeah, it was an advanced civilization, and it is now in ruins, and it took them 50 years instead of 50,000. So something to think about.
Ozymandias level of hubris there.
Yeah, so you're saying there's people think of a continuum kind of between pro-tech, anti-tech, and on this axis, there's actually another axis, which is spiritually good, spiritually evil, that people are not taking into account that they should be operating on.
Well, even just what is spiritual health?
Right.
How would you even know if you were in need of spiritual wellness and where it is to be found? Now, some Americans have tried to answer that question by going in the direction of the work ethic. If I just fill all of my time with something productive, then that's gonna just kind of stop me from doing spiritually bad stuff, idle hands at the devil's plaything. And other Americans have taken it in the direction of, well, I know that if I'm guilty, it doesn't matter how many bad habits I have, because I can always just feel guilty about them and then hope for the best. I think that it starts at the heart, and if you want to be able to trust your own awareness, if you want to be able to cultivate a kind of spiritual discernment so that you can orient yourself in the physical and cultural, social, political, and spiritual space that you find yourself in, it doesn't start with going around and sort of criticizing people or complaining about people or trying to win at the game of critical theory or critical thinking or critical anything. We've got plenty of words, and now we're adding more words, and so we better have a darn good reason to say anything whatsoever, because where it starts is in the heart, and the heart is a deep and mysterious place, and if you are unable to navigate that place, then you're probably not going to get very far out here in the external world.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember chatting with John Ascos about this, thinking of the Constitution as a piece of legal innovation like tech in a sense. And there's the famous quote of that the Constitution is only fit for like a moral and religious people. It took elements that existed in legal tradition and innovated on top of them, and then presented them on top of a people that they assumed a certain user of that tradition for it to work. And similar fashion, it seems like the technologies that we're seeing emerging right now, AI or what did you call it? Automated simulations. These don't assume a moral and religious people. Well, maybe they do. They don't assume. They don't say which morality or which religion. They just amplify whatever is the substrate of both the creator and the user. I think that's what's kind of fascinating, technology aside, like just how it works inside, is the amplification of certain things depending on the origin of that simulation. Like the Google Gemini stuff, for example. That was like a megaphone stuck over like a religious text or a worldview, if you would, and it just kind of blasted it. What do you think of the Google Gemini stuff? As you saw it kind of take over Twitter, what was your reaction?
Yeah, AI, I regret to inform you, this too is social credit. It's all social credit, whether it's social media or whether it's assigning certain weights to certain tokens in a certain data set and telling an automated simulator to take that, to take those numbers and run with them. It's all coming from us, and it's all going into a box, and in the box, decisions are being made about how to treat the information, how to rank it, how to prioritize it, how to parse it. So at the highest level, and even at the lowest level, you're not going to find some neutrality. You're not going to find some point that stands outside of itself that's able to apply a neutral standard. It's very inviting to conclude based on that like, well, truth is going to be our standard, and it's like, what's that? What is truth? Jesus was asked that question by the man who had the power to end his earthly life or to save it, and he answered with silence. What is there to learn from that? It's a race to catechize the bots, and people are catching on, not just here but around the world, that the only measure by which human beings have the authority to impose on our machines a bias, a rule set that can cover everything that these machines can do, well, that's going to be spiritual authority. That's going to be something religious. Pointed this out 3 years ago in Human Forever. It's the digital politics of spiritual war, and every major power on this planet that is also a major digital power is racing, intentionally or otherwise, to reestablish its sovereignty over cyberspace within its territorial bounds, and and oftentimes beyond, on the basis of its original religion, the religion of its civilization state. This is not, I don't make the rules, this isn't a matter of what I want to be true or what I think we should do about the situation. It's just a matter of sort of recognizing that certain kinds of Americans created technologies that were powerful enough to not just eat the world, but to, you're talking about like transcending our condition or whatever. These technologies kind of broke the algorithm or broke the script of the kind of spiritual understanding that those Americans had. Mm-hmm. And that puts us in a position that we really haven't been in before as Americans. And I think we've got to be, not just smart about what we do about that, but really spiritually discerning. This is not a good time to be making, rash and irresponsible decisions. Now, I know that, responsibility is now sort of like a bad word, or like a joke word, or like a meme word in tech, because the vast majority of people who are ranting about responsibility are like, well, we're not going to have wokeness without a woke supercomputer. We can't really make a true, we can't have a theocracy of justice unless we create this god of justice, which is going to be the woke supercomputer. They're talking about social justice, like they want to perfect justice through social credit. That's just what it is, and that is, a plausible spiritual response to the technological predicament that we have put ourselves in. The bad news is it's also like not compatible with the recognizably American country that we live in, and it would require exactly what we're seeing, like a post-constitutional revolution against the people in order to create that new thing. And their promise is very straightforward, and they're being very open about it, and they're presenting it in terms of responsibility and ethics. And all these words that are very spiritual or parasitic on spirituality, and yet most of them don't quite want to put it in terms, in overtly religious terms yet.
So how would you characterize the conflict of our time? Maybe let's just in the U.S., but globally it's fine. But there, some people would say, like Catherine Bowe was on our pod last week, and she said it's not left versus right; it's more institutionalist versus anti-institutionalist.
Right.
And there's the blue state versus the gray state, the red state, biology's framing, and the cathedral. What do you see as the sides, if you would?
Look, there are many sides. This is a time of great fracture and factionalism. Anywhere you look, you see internal power struggles bursting out into the open, and secret conflicts appearing in various hotspots. And I think that a lot of those conflicts are so dangerous and so conspicuous because look, there's a lot of talk right now about Christian nationalism, and I sort of want to say, like, oh, you mean like Judeo-Christian nationalism, which is what we've had for at least, I don't know, arguably for more than 100 years. Why are we even talking about Christian nationalism if we still have Judeo-Christian nationalism? And the answer is because Judeo-Christian nationalism is failing. It's exploding. It's collapsing. It's breaking up into pieces. There's obviously a Jewish civil war going on right now. They're not out in the streets shooting each other, but you look at what's happening in Israel, you look at what's happening with the diaspora, you look at just the Oscars, you have the Jewish filmmaker doing his Auschwitz movie, standing up there and saying, I refute my Jewishness. Like, there are serious issues here, and they're so serious because the technology's been pushed to a point where it arouses these fundamentally theological questions about who we are and why we're here and how we must live in this world. And that puts a lot of pressure on religions. It puts a lot of pressure on churches to respond with some authority that makes sense to people and that they can hearken unto. And if your religion is struggling there, it's going to be a rough road. You look at what's going on with Protestantism in America, just ridiculous amounts of fracture, confusion, FUD. It's a mess. It is a mess. You've got your queer Borg flags over here, and you've got your mega churches over there, and you've got retention rates that are just in free fall, and it's happening to everyone. It's happening to the main lines. It's happening to the Evos. It's happening to the Mormons. American Jews are sharply divided. All of these fractures and all these conflicts that are breaking out right now are demonstrating, to me at least, that that the dominant spiritual culture of modern America booted up a technology that they thought was gonna, well, we built these things. They're gonna be our friends. They're just gonna make everything more like it is now. And that's not the way technology works. Marshall McLuhan made all this quite explicit, but you can also just kind of get to it by common sense. People build things and they just filter all their experience through these things. When TV is the dominant medium, people are like, everything's a screen. I'm in a show. I'm the main character. Like, everything's a dream. If you can dream it, you can do it. And it's the land of pure imagination, industrial light and magic. Imagine all the people. That's what shapes the psycho-technological environment. When books were the dominant medium, everything's a book. My life is a book. I'm like a character in a novel. It's just what people do. Right. And so now it's like everything's a computer. We live in a simulation. Like everything's an algorithm. I feel like a bot. I identify as part of a swarm.
NPC, yeah.
Right. We have to just understand that this is like kind of what happens if there isn't a higher level of authoritative spiritual organization to say, you are not a book, you are not a TV show, you are not a robot, you are not an NPC, you are a human being created by not just the universe, not just a deity, not just a just deity, not even just a spiritual father, but a loving God.
Right.
Once you get to that level, then the way in which you process all of these things that are happening and all of these factional conflicts and all of the, in some ways a tremendous uncertainty, but in other ways a tremendous certainty. Wow, I guess we're effed. Like, yes. Suddenly processing all those things becomes more something that you can face every day without needing to drug yourself into oblivion or to distract yourself into oblivion or
trance yourself into oblivion.
Right. You don't need to. Men will literally cut their penis off instead of going to church. So I think that's the divide. The divide is between people who have the church to a degree that they do not worship any of the many idols that are available to us, including technology, including whatever, electricity. We worshipped electricity for a long time. The power of the atomic bomb. These things are all too easy to worship. And if you don't have the church, and you don't have the saints, and you don't have the monasteries, and you don't have people praying for the salvation of the world, every waking minute of their lives, if you don't have the sacraments, if you don't have the church, if you have the pod and the bugs, or you have, Mars or whatever, and that's your God, then you are going to be hurting, no matter how fast you run and no matter how fast you try to outrun your problems. So again, this is not just like proselytization here. I'm not just going around knocking on people's doors, although maybe I should be doing that instead. Maybe I should. But the reality is people don't want that. You go back and you read the Desert Fathers and you read the saints, and they are unanimous. Like, what doesn't work? Bothering people about their spiritual shortcomings, right? Have you noticed that you suck spiritually and like you should really listen to my complaints about you? And no, it's just like beating people around the ears with words does not lead them to that change of heart that they need in order to draw closer to God. You're better off sitting in your closet and praying for them. So this is not just I think a lot of Americans now think of Christianity and they think of annoying, proselytizers bothering them with literature, and that is not Christianity. No matter how well intentioned, you can't boil it down to that. And if you want to make it through what we are experiencing, and you want to make it through without resorting to to war, to Machiavellianism, to basically corruption and sin. The door is open. The door is open to encounter God in your heart, and proceed from there into an authoritative 2,000-year-old plus spiritual structure, an institution that is not like the other institutions.
Right. I think that's an interesting piece I've been thinking about, is that it seems like institutions. I think a big reason why there's chaos in our time is at the sort of individual level, is there are all these institutions that we thought were permanent, like Harvard. Harvard will be around forever. They're kind of this thing, like Google, multi whatever billion or trillion market cap. It's going to be around forever. Like it's an unwavering institution, and all around us, like especially young people, find themselves seeing like these things that they thought they were permanent. Not only they're not permanent, these institutions, but they're betraying them as they kind of collapse. They're betraying,
and they're all pseudo churches,
right?
Mm-hmm. Whether it's the great scholastic universities of New England, or whether it's the Latter-day Scholastic University, right? Scholastic universities of Silicon Valley. I mean, I've been speaking pretty abstractly, I guess, and that's never ideal. But this is a podcast, so I feel like I can read things off of my phone.
You can do
without violating a decorum here, and so
you wouldn't be the first.
I would not, and I will probably not be the last. Tom Wolfe wrote.
We're all Tom Wolfe respecters.
Yeah, I figured
this is true.
Tom Wolfe wrote a fascinating little essay in Esquire magazine back when that was a thing, December of 1983, and it's called "The Tinkerings of Robert Noyce: How the Sun Rose on Silicon Valley." The slug here I will read, and then I'll go down into the body text. America is today in the midst of a great technological revolution. With the advent of the silicon chip, information processing, communications, and the national economy have been strikingly altered. The new technology is changing how we live, how we work, how we think. The revolution didn't just happen. It was engineered by a small number of people, principally middle Americans, whose horizons were as unlimited as the Iowa sky. Collectively, they engineered tomorrow. Foremost among them is Robert Noyce. So, the meme joke here is like early life, right? Like, okay, let's see what's going on with Robert Noyce. And here's his deal. Where do I want to pick it up? Right. Like his brothers, Bob was a bright student, but he had just been thrown out of school first semester. It had taken every bit of credit Gale had in the local favor bank, not only with other faculty members, but also with the sheriff, to keep the boy from being expelled for good and stigmatized with a felony conviction. So, okay, we're starting to get a sense of the rambunctiousness that is recognizably American, perhaps especially in the Midwest. Here's where it gets important. Bob Noyce's father, Ralph Sr., was a congregational minister. Not only that, both his grandfathers were congregational ministers. But that hadn't helped at all. In an odd way, after the thing happened, the boy's clerical lineage had boomeranged on him. People were going around saying, well, what do you expect from a preacher's son? It was as if people in Grinnell unconsciously agreed with Sherwood Anderson that underneath the righteousness the Midwestern Protestant preachers urged upon them, and which they themselves professed to uphold, lived demons of weakness, perversion, and hypocrisy that would break loose sooner or later. So it's like classic Tom Wolfe lingo. No one denied that the Noyce boys were polite and proper in all outward appearances. They were all members of the Boy Scouts. They went to Sunday school and the main Sunday service at the First Congregational Church and were active in the church youth groups. They were pumped full of Congregationalism until it was spilling over. Their father, although a minister, was not the minister of the First Congregational Church. He was the associate superintendent of the Iowa Conference of Congregational Churches, whose headquarters were at the college. The original purpose of the college had been to provide a good academic congregational education, and many of the graduates became teachers. The conference was a coordinating council rather than a governing body, since a prime tenet of the Congregational Church, embedded in its name, was that each congregation was autonomous. Congregationalists rejected the very idea of a church hierarchy. A congregational minister was not supposed to be a father or even a shepherd, but rather a teacher. Each member of the congregation was supposed to internalize the moral precepts of the church and be his own priest, dealing directly with God. So the job of secretary of the Iowa Conference of Congregational Churches was anything but a position of power. It didn't pay much either. I will go on. There was no upper crust in Grinnell. There were no top people who kept the social score in such matters. Congregationalists rejected the idea of a social hierarchy as fiercely as they did the idea of a religious hierarchy. The Congregationalists, like the Presbyterians, Methodists, Baptists, and United Brethren, were dissenting Protestants. They were direct offshoots of the Separatists, who had split off from the Church of England in the 16th and 17th centuries and settled New England. At bottom, their doctrine of the autonomous congregation was derived from their hatred of the British system of class and status, with its endless gradations, topped off by the court and the aristocracy. Even as late as 1948, the typical small town of the Middle West, like Grinnell, had nothing approaching a country club set. There were subtle differences in status in Grinnell as in any other place, and it was better to be rich than poor, but there were only two obvious social ranks: those who were devout, educated, and hardworking, and those who weren't. So you can see here that Tom Wolfe very, very cleverly noticed, capital N, that Silicon Valley didn't just appear because innovation, right? There was a small group of folks who were present at the creation and pushed the research and development agenda of technological innovation in specific directions, more or less because of their spiritual formation. And that spiritual formation coming out of the Midwest was a kind of Protestantism, dissenting Protestantism, that used to carry a lot of water in this country. And where is it now? You know, how many Congregationalists do you know? Like, these churches, and you can go back to the Puritans with this, and you can see, you know, you go from Jonathan Edwards to Ralph Waldo Emerson in almost the blink of an eye, from really intensely spiritually disciplined and ascetic fire and brimstone Christianity to transcendentalism, to the Oneida cult, to you know, Whitman. It all just blows away. And so you get that kind of, that Midwestern, very decentralized, no church, no hierarchy, no priest, no sacraments. And that's what fuels not just innovation, not just Silicon Valley, but a specific way of approaching the question of technology and how technology should be pushed in order to establish itself in a certain way in our social and political life. This is kind of what I'm gesturing at when I talk about, like, look, you know, there's a certain kind of spiritual culture in the US that thought that the technology it created would serve that culture. But in fact, that culture has sort of dried up, and then we still have the technology. Right. And so we're getting, you know, a kind of, it's structurally congregationalist, but it's anti-Christian, it's post-Christian, it's, you know, it's people hoping that number go up, or it's people trying to build the woke supercomputer, or it's people trying to, you know, Mo Gadot, this former Google guy, who's basically like, we suck, we're building a new god, and that's kind of the end of it. And you know, for most Americans who aren't tracking these things, it's just whiplash. It's like, well, wait a minute, you know, like, the First Methodist is straight down the hall at the end of the street, like it always used to be. So, like, why has everything changed? And it's just going to be a difficult reckoning. You know, it's going to be a difficult reckoning unless you have a kind of spiritual and theological standpoint that you can trace back further than, you know, your great grandfather, who, like, well, I think he lived in Ohio, and then the family moved to Tennessee. You know, there is this kind of weird primordial forest into which the ancestry of so many Americans disappears. It's like you're really impressive in the U.S. if you can go back all the way to the Mayflower. Well, if you're trying to wrestle with these massive epical transformations in technology and the kinds of ultimate questions that the degree of technological innovation has thrown us back on, and, you know, you can't even, you really start getting lost if you try to go back more than 80 years. It's just going to be a rough road, and we all have our crosses to bear, and I think that's going to be one for many people.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely been an issue with generational faithfulness in America that you can see over the last 100 years.
That's something you cannot fake.
And why is it happening? I mean, it's for all the obvious reasons. It would be considered an imprudent and unpopular and maybe even downright mean thing to say that sending all of these women to college has been like net a disaster, right? That's the kind of thing that will get you in trouble to say.
Not on the New Founding podcast.
And so I'm not going to say
Yeah, we're someone to say that they might get in trouble from
I
on our
am
podcast.
not going to say that, but I am going to say that anecdotally, if you just, it's, folks on the left, especially the Wookiees, they like to make a big deal of lived experience and how lived experience is more important than facts and logic. And you know what? This is a case of like the woke being more correct than the mainstream. People don't care about facts and logic. They don't want to be hit over the head with words. You can't argue someone into submission, force them to have a change of heart. You can't make people religious by passing a law. Like, it is lived experience. It is driven by lived experience. And the mystery of trying to figure out how to deal with who you are when you encounter yourself in the depths of your heart, it's gnarly business. And
I think Oren says, reverses that Shapiro quote. Facts don't care about your feelings. Oh, actually, feelings don't care about your facts.
Right. Okay. So when you approach the question of like, well, why is it that retention rates are so bad, and why is it that Christianity, especially Protestant, has gone through, but not just Protestant, has gone through these waves of just sort of people shedding and getting lost and becoming NONES, the bad kind of nun, and then that kind of goes 5 seconds later. It goes from you're a nun to you're like walking the bondage puppy in the Rainbow Flag Parade. What happened? Well, anecdotally, you get a lot of successful white middle class men in the 80s and 90s who they had the work ethic, they had the relatively post-institutional, post-hierarchical Christian way of life. They made some money, but of course it's never enough, and we've been hearing about how the middle class is shrinking and is being squeezed. Not untrue, since the 80s, since the middle class, the triumph of the middle class. No sooner did it actually exist than they're like, we're dying. Okay, so you have these guys, and they have some money, but it's never enough, and so they have children, and probably just a couple of kids. And so it's not like we have 5 kids, so I don't know. You kind of shoot them out of the house like you have like a t-shirt cannon, and you hope that some of them land somewhere fertile and it grows into more family. But it's also not like they have 1 kid, so they're like, we're not letting you leave the house. They have a couple kids, and they have some money, and they feel like they're gonna do pretty well because America's doing pretty well. We defeated all the other empires. We're the last one left, so it's not really an empire, it's just turning the world into America. We all live happily ever after. So it's okay to send your kids out of the house because it's all one big America, and your main goal for them is not for them to become saints, it's not for them to become warriors, it's not for them to die honorably, it is for them to get to a higher place than you got to. Right? So what does that mean? That means like, well, I don't want my daughter to just marry the guy down the street. I want
like
Pumpkin.
My wife did.
Yes, right. And you see how that turned out.
Yes.
You want Pumpkin to go to the best darn school she can get into, even if it costs money that we don't have. Even if Dad has no experience with the socioeconomic life of the people up there. I'm gonna send Pumpkin to Princeton or wherever, and I'm gonna send her in blind. I'm gonna fly over the campus and pull the hatch and like, I love you, And what happens? We saw what happened. We saw women graduating from these colleges getting worse jobs than their father got, worse, more deadening workplace environment, more dead-end jobs. Not enough to raise a family, not even enough to raise themselves. Student loan debt that they can't escape. SSRIs, rapes, sexual assaults, just a string of like gross hookups that make you sort of like, well, if this is it doesn't have to be rape for it to suck. We know this because people choose to do things that are bad for them all the time, and then they regret it, and then that becomes part of their spiritual battle that they can't figure out how to win because they have no spiritual institutional authority to resort to. And it's been a disaster. It's been a disaster for women. It's been a disaster for men. A lot of this stuff happened to men first, and that's why it became okay to sort of like laugh at the pathetic man, because they did become more pathetic. They didn't become priests. They didn't become warriors. They didn't die for the country. I mean, if they did, we kind of didn't talk about that very much, and we tried to keep those numbers low. If you wanted to become a priest, no, you're a pedophile. If you wanted to become a soldier, like, no, you're just killing brown people. If you wanted to like start a business or run a corporation, no, that's just greedy. If you want to start a family, no, it's patriarchy. All the things that there were for guys to do became wrong and bad. And right, so the one thing that you could do was like hunker down in the cubicle and just data entry and hope for the best. And no sooner did society finish just kind of eating up all of those men, then the locust swarm needed somewhere else to go, and the only place left for it to go was for all the young women. And so it was. And so we have seen this story play out. And it is just terribly sad. It's terribly sad, and it's difficult to talk about because when angry smart nerds talk about it, they say like, today I'm going to explain to you why it's terrible for women to go to college and girls should never go to... And it's like, man, that isn't getting down to the spiritual root of the matter, and it isn't talking about things in a way where people become more inclined to open up the Gom Jabbar of their hearts and like take a look at what's inside. So look, this is just one example of how it is that we really just hornswoggled ourselves like so dramatically as a people, and really just like deeply imbibed this Kool-Aid that is like, we are Americans, we won the game of planet Earth, anything that we do is going to work out, anything that we build is going to help us, and this tremendous unearned confidence that had at some point become unglued and detached from any kind of real spiritual life. It's been terribly damaging, and it's going to keep on being damaging unless and until we fall down on our knees, condemn ourselves, and beg for mercy, which will come, but it's going to be painful.
Yeah. Man, so many places to go from
There's
there.
a lot of places to go.
You talked about the pseudo-church nature of a lot of these institutions. I assume you watched Severance, the show?
I was told to watch
Okay.
Severance, and I disobeyed. I just didn't do it.
Okay.
This is like Apple TV, is that what
It is
That's
Apple
right.
TV. It's worth
Well,
watching.
my
But they lean
fiance
into
does
this.
not want to be blackpilled by
Okay.
by entertainment, especially since she's in the entertainment industry.
Sure.
And, it's just sort of like is spiritually like the last survivor of the peak 90s culture, where it's like, she just, every time we talk about this, she brings up like the Amanda show, like Amanda Bynes. Where it was like, she's amazing, she's so young and like fresh and funny, and she can do everything, and she's like a great actress and like really charismatic and not trashy, and she's like the youngest star on I think it was like Nickelodeon, right?
Yes, I think so.
And
Disney Channel, maybe.
Yeah, the youngest maybe Disney Channel. I've sort of like forced myself to forget all this stuff, but it keeps revenging itself on the world. And where is she now? And where she's now is like a totally like lost and damaged person trying to like claw back some semblance of normalcy, and it's just not talked about. It's as if we don't ask who killed Jeffrey Epstein, and we don't ask like who killed Amanda Bynes' soul. There's just a lot of reckoning. There's a lot of reckoning to be done. It's truth and reconciliation, and not the kind that you get out of like Nelson Mandela or the woke supercomputer.
Yeah, I mean, there's that same fallout globally, like you mentioned, where growing up, 90s, there was this very firm conviction across the board that number one, we were spreading democracy across the globe. All would be America. At the same time, there was we had this nice self-righteousness. We're like, we're not an empire. Other people have done that. America's awesome.
We're
just
not
let
an
people
empire,
choose
and it's
it.
good that we are.
Right. Exactly.
Yes.
And then, now even in the last 2 years, for the first time, I think there's a distinct realization, even for those people, that might not be how it is actually happening. Like, we can't actually enforce our policy in places like Ukraine, maybe Taiwan, Afghanistan. Like, things are that worldview is starting to crack a little bit.
It is starting to crack. We did this to ourselves. Even just look at something like smart power, right? Like, there's a term of art. Where'd that come from? It was seemed to be really powerful, during the 90s, during the 2000s. The whole foreign policy establishment was always talking about smart power. Like, we're not just going to go around dropping bombs on people. It's not going to be boots on the ground. It's going to be smart power. Well, what's that? Well, it was a term that was coined by two specific academics in basically international relations theory, and one was a Jewish professor and one was a Unitarian professor, and you can just this too is Judeo-Christian nationalism. Like, the primrose path was very wide, and a lot of successful Americans with what they thought were very secure spiritual foundations created this sort of overlay, this tech-powered global American empire, and they really expected it to succeed decades ago, and it has just been like sticking your hand in the meat grinder. No, we got it down to Iraq, Iran, and North Korea. We take care of those guys, and it's the end of tyranny in the world, indefinitely.
Right.
Original sin wiped.
Well, if you get rid of the tyranny, then everything's going to be fine, because there's, the longing for freedom in every human breast is just going to be like let out.
Blossom.
Right, and it's going to blossom. And the machinery that was built to create that paradise on Earth has created something else. And the elites who have just beclowned themselves in this process are very unhappy, and they're mentally, they're not in a good place. We can see this, we can see it on the faces of many of these elites, and we can see the way that they just grabbed onto Donald Trump with, like, thank God, like the worst person in the universe is here.
Our sin.
Common enemy. Yeah.
Someone who we can use to distract ourselves from the colossal systemic failure of, their attempt to establish to establish the spiritual authority of themselves over the entire world. It didn't work, and then there was Trump, and then they're like, oh great, now we don't have to talk about that stuff. We can just talk about Orange Man Bad. And we're still sort of in this vapor lock where that's what's still going on. The fever has to break, and it's gonna break.
Yeah, I saw last week. I think it was the Victoria Nolan picture when she was,
right.
I think
Before
Daryl posted this. Yeah, Daryl, and he was like, by age, I think he was quoting Orwell. He's like, by age 50, everybody has the face that they're supposed to have. And you see the picture when she first joined the I don't even know what her role was at the time, but she's young, attractive, looks normal, like a normal person, And then you see the most recent picture of her at just standing there, not even doing anything particular. It looks like with her face, but there's this like deep bitterness that just emanates, like almost like a self-loathing that you can see just come through the screen. And you don't have to talk to her, you don't have to hear her talk. You just any normal person sees that picture and they're like, that's not a good person. That's not a person I want ruling over me.
Well, I've been a critic of hers for a long time, and especially lately, just arranging things such that maybe 750 million Christian men murder each other in the muck of eastern Ukraine. Like, this is an incalculable monstrosity. It never should have happened. It shouldn't be happening now. And she bears direct personal responsibility for that. So that said, I can probably draw a comparison between her and Winston Churchill without getting myself in trouble. But like, look, presiding over the collapse of an empire sucks. It's not fun. It's not glamorous. And just when you think that it can't get any worse, it does. You know, Churchill went from being at the apex of the British Empire to no more British Empire in his lifetime as the foremost leader of the British.
Right.
And yeah, he saved the UK, I guess. I mean, you know, checking in on the UK in 2024. I'm sorry, but it doesn't look like Winston Churchill won. It doesn't look like he even won by like the minimal victory condition. That's really rough. And I don't envy any of these Western leaders who have been trying to preserve the empire. It was not built on rock. It was built on sand, and I'm sure that Victoria Nuland has had just a very rough time trying to make it work. And the lesson there is like, don't try to make that work. Try to make something else work. And we're seeing that, you know, we're seeing that in El Salvador, we're seeing that, you know, in Argentina, and we can go off for an endless amount of time on the personalities of these figures and where they're coming from and, you know, what the dangers are that lie in wait. But at least there's a recognition that we're not going to go back, and we've got to just be honest about where this path has led us and try to pick things up from there. It's going to take work and it's going to take sacrifice, but there is a part of us that knows that already, you know, and just doing away with the idea that, you know, well, the World Economic Forum is going to make the pain go away, or like, well, you know, the BTC going up to $2 zillion a coin is going to make the pain go away. Or, you know,
Vision Pro, you know,
whatever. Or the AI is going to make it go away. Or like, you know, Chinese manufacturing is going to make it go away. Or like, you know, I mean, there are so many of these now, and so many of them are increasingly tied up with identity politics, where, you know, it's like the international Jewish cabal is going to make the pain go away. Or like, you know, Vladimir Putin conquering Europe is going to make the pain go away. And at the same time, you have people being like, oh, they're the problem, or they're the problem, or the AI is the problem. Yes, it's all a problem, and none of it's going to make the pain go away. So we just have to start over, and we have to start on our knees. And if we have the humility to do that, we're going to have a much better chance than if we try to just fight another round of religious civil war, which has been the hallmark of the West for like so long. And I get it, and I really do, but it's time to grow up a little bit, and it's time to soften our hearts a little bit.
You said, you know, you mentioned a couple of times, we've seen this movie before. I think a lot of people growing up in the US in the last 50 years, they haven't seen the movie before. They haven't even read beyond 100 years back. They're not aware of the cycles, versus like people in ancient times, Herodotus, whoever, they're saying, or we're saying, we've seen this movie before and we'll see it again and again and again. Like we're just watching reruns. This is always going to be the same cycle of these different government styles. Do you think that's what we're returning to, in the sense of we're just in a macro cycle that we're going to return to monarchy or whatever it is? Or do you see this as the same but different? Is technology going to make a difference in what we see going forward?
Yeah, you know, there's this question about like, well, how much does America have to be humbled in order for us to kind of get out of the vapor lock? And yeah, you know, I remember sort of 1998 coming to DC for the first time, getting involved in like intellectual whatever, and you start running into these Catholic monarchists, you know, and they're like, Africa is the last hope of the West because this is the only place where we can find people who have not been corrupted and they're ready to receive the word, and it's going to be you know, the Habsburgs are coming back, and the, you know, and the whole thing, which is now like kind of a meme that everyone kind of in this world can laugh along to. But at the time it was sort of like, did I get off the wrong, like, mess this up? Like, what is happening? Even among the ortho bros, I now count myself among their number. Some of them are like, don't worry, you guys. Western Europe is 1 foot in the grave, and the Tsar is going to return, and it's all gonna be purified, and it's all gonna be okay. And so there are many reasons now, why the children or the grandchildren of Americans who have not seen this movie before are going to be inclined to say, like, you know what, like, just burn it all down. Constitution, democracy. If the rule brought us to this, then what was the use of the rule? What was that? What was that character's name? In No Country
Anton
for-
Sugar.
Yes, Anton Chigurh thought.
Right. Yeah.
I think a lot of this is much more idle of talk than many people would want it to be. Trying to find consolation in prognostication, this is not a good idea. I think it is true that the question of where new Christians are going to come from has more geostrategic kind of significance to it than is maybe getting the attention it deserves. The church has said, for relatively obvious reasons, that you're better off being like a pagan who has never heard the word of God and has never had the opportunity to receive Christ, than you are being like an apostate or a heretic who did have the opportunity and did take advantage and did come and see and did taste of Christ and said, you know what, I give up, or this is too hard for me, or I don't know, I'd rather have nice things, or whatever.
Or not nice things in many cases.
Or terrible things. Yes. It's a terrible thing. It's like, shut up and take my money. And so there's this question unfolding in America of, like, is America beginning to fill up with people who did have the opportunity to live the Christian way of life and knowingly rejected it? That seems like tough soil for the Word of God, right? People who have hardened their hearts and created so much distance between themselves and God that they no longer believe that it can be closed. Whereas elsewhere in the world, where people have not been through that de-Christianization process, at least, just kind of in the world of words and thoughts, that could be more fertile ground. If it is, you look in those areas, and how many of them are like Western-style democracies? And it's like, well, not a ton. Even some democracies, as we know, are not particularly democratic, so your mileage may vary. But I think for those kinds of reasons, Christians are increasingly sort of questioning democracy and are concerned that the democracies are filling up with people who have renounced and knowingly rejected God to a degree that it's hard to understand how to bring them into recovery, how to encourage a change of heart, metanoia, in those people. Not because the goal is to create a Christian theocracy and, well, I guess we'll just have to pass a law where they're going to be forced to become, it's like, that's not, the church historically has, without, obviously long before America came along, basically taken the First Amendment position of, like, church needs to be free to do what the church does. And and the regime can be a really bad regime. It can be a really incompetent regime. It can be a tyrannical regime. It can be a monarchy, a democracy, whatever. But as long as it's not infringing on what the church does, then, we'll pray for you. We're not going to try to overthrow you, but you can't make us worship idols, and you can't even force people to convert to join us, because they're not properly catechized. If the secret police knock on the door and they go like, well, you sign here, you're now a member of the church, like, that ain't right. So I think the question of what to do with a country full of people who have hardened themselves in that way is a tricky one. And you can just go back to Tocqueville on this too if you don't want to go down the other roads. Tocqueville's like, what is to be done with the people who have turned away from God? As a political matter, what do you do with them? How do you create a stable form of order for such people, which is the task of a statesman? And again, not very glamorous, not a lot of fun. I don't envy people who have that job, but it is a challenge, and it's especially a challenge because, as we've seen, it's not as if that class of people just says, I don't believe in religion anymore, I'm going to go about my business and be a productive member of society. Like, that really isn't, maybe it happens for the initial 5 to 10 years of sort of people, but as the generations unfold, you see that it goes in a direction of wanting to set up a kind of a post-Christian theocracy where different idols are worshipped, and gosh darn it, the state is going to force you to worship those idols because we worship justice, or we worship any there's so many little pieces of God that you can just break off and try to turn that into God and try to build a state church around that. And that can be technology, that can be hormone blockers, that can be reparations, it can be anything that you want to falsely worship, you can. And so in a society where so many people have basically said, no, Christianity sucks, I don't want to be involved, that doesn't mean that their spiritual longings have died. Quite the contrary, they become more frantic, and they get applied to things that are bad to worship, number one, because they're not God, but then number two, extra bad because they can become the pretext for establishing that kind of theocracy that is still so fundamentally at odds with what America is and always has been.
Mm-hmm. So as we wrap up here, we're sitting in this place of chaos, all the things that we've talked about, tech innovations, global disruption. What do you see as sort of the ideal path out if there was a good outcome, and what can we do to enact that?
Yeah, in 30 seconds.
In 30 seconds, please solve the world.
In 140 characters, James.
Ideally, we would stop worshiping justice. Not that justice is bad, of course. We'd stop worshiping intelligence. Not that intelligence is bad. We'd stop worshiping our own tools and machines. Again, not that they're bad. Nothing that's out here is inherently good or bad. It's the uses to which they're put, and it is the purpose for which they are designed that is the issue. And even just starting at that level is going to be important. And when you do deny yourself the perverse payoff of giving in to the temptation to worship intelligence or worship technology or worship a certain race of people, or worship the ability to change your child from one sex into whatever that is, when you give up those things and you sacrifice them to God, whether intentionally or otherwise, a painful silence opens up. And that painful silence is and always has been the precondition of spiritual advancement, of accelerating the process of spiritual development. it was one of the big quotes from Father Seraphim Rose that likes to make its way around the internet is, it's later than you think, so hasten to do the work of God. That's a kind of accelerationism. It's not one that gets talked about very much, but, we have these cycles, and a lot of the sort of Hellenistic bros like to think that Polybius was right, and it's just, the wheel of time goes around and around, and the Kali Yuga comes and goes, and this is all just going to kind of cosmically play out forever. And it's not going to be an infinite loop, if Jesus Christ is to be believed. And so, whether at a macro level or whether just at the micro level of your life, I mean, a lot of us guys have been fortunate enough to make it into our somewhere in that late 30s to early 50s range, like pretty well educated and pretty well experienced, and not totally destroyed our lives, and had some children and made some money, and look younger than our grandparents did at that age, or whatever. Like many of us, in spite of it all, are in pretty good condition and feel like we've got a lot of miles left on our cars, so to speak. Well, that's good, but ask me again in 5 years, how you feel, and chances are you're going to feel like, well, like the world is even more like it was 5 years ago, but in an even more exaggerated form. And, and I am getting slower, and I am remembering less, and I do have more obligations, and I do have more duties, and I do have to lean on God more. And like, it's gonna, the gradation is increasing. It's going to be more of a struggle, and we should welcome that, but we should prepare for that properly.
Yeah. James, where's the best place for people to find you online?
Well, I am on X, periodically posting at James Poulos, so DMs are open. I don't know if that's a mistake today, but they are open, and if you need to be ignored, I will ignore you. So take that for what it's worth. I edit The American Mind at the Claremont Institute. That's claremont.org. I'm running Return, which is the tech vertical, at blazemedia.com/return. There's a TV show. It's called 0 Hour, the show where it's always later than you think. That is on YouTube as well as BlazeTV. What am I missing?
Your book.
The book, yes. Human Forever, The Digital Politics of Spiritual War. It's more true today than it was when I wrote it. So that's always, I don't know if that's good news or bad news. Maybe a little
Probably bad.
But that is it, canonic. Buy it in Bitcoin. Look, people want to get rich. I get it. It seems like your option is to get rich or just kind of, cry trying. So I'm not asking you to spend all of your Bitcoin. I'm just asking you to spend $30 worth of fiat bucks of Bitcoin on canonic.xyz to get Human Forever. And that's probably just about enough about me.
Awesome. Excellent. James, thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the New Founding Podcast. New Founding has become a rallying point for founders and investors who are taking serious bets in the face of a stagnant business culture. Our venture fund backs founders building dynamic companies, powered by American ideals and a positive national vision. These are the kinds of founders that embody the optimism and competence of the people who come on this podcast. If you're interested in investing in our fund, check out newfounding.com/venture fund and follow the link to apply.